All right, well, it's 6 o'clock, so we're gonna get started. This is a very yeah, we can almost do one-on-one here. For the people that are online, there's only like 3 people in person, so it's a big old room for a little bit of people. But anyway, so getting started, just some housekeeping items. Lexi is here to teach this class, so yay, exciting. First things first, we do have canning classes for the month of August. So if you have not signed up for those, I highly recommend you do. They are August 2nd, which is tomorrow. That'll be water bath canning. They'll all take place at Grace Meadows. They've sent multiple emails, but August 15th will be a cooking class. August 22nd will be pressure canning, and August 30th will be another cooking class. So really, again, even if you know how to can and cook, it's a great opportunity to come out and like meet fellow gardeners, maybe learn some new skills, connect. It'll be a good time. Please turn in your July harvest totals. I have like 12 people's totals right now, and they're due on Wednesday. So I'm begging you, please turn your harvest totals in. We have a Grow Appalachia report due on Friday. And so we really want our harvest totals to look good for that. So if you could please email them to me, rosie@arcd.org by Wednesday, that would be great. It's also just a really busy week in general. We also have our fall plant and seed orders due on Friday. So I've seen a lot of you have gotten those in already, which is great, thank you. But we will have plants ready the week of August 15th. So if you could get them in by Friday, that would be great. And I can go ahead and start filling your seed orders. And then, yeah, so Friday. And then Lexi is going to go over fall gardening and soil health today. And then the September workshop will be on season extension, and we'll talk about garlic as well. And those materials will be handed out in September as well. Yeah, and then the only other thing is our next workshop will not be the first Monday because it's Labor Day in September, so it will be September 12th to avoid Labor Day. So yeah, that's all I have for you. I'll turn it over to Lexi.
You have a sheet of paper, I think. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I guess we can
Just making sure I can see you. Okay, Ken.
yes. All right. So fall gardening. I think a lot of folks think of gardening, they just think May through maybe September, October. But really we have a climate with just a little bit of protection. You can get your garden going year round. And why would you want to do that? Great question. I love gardening in the fall and winter because it's not hot, first off. There's fewer pests and diseases, which is great. No mosquitoes buzzing around you. The weeds do not grow as much. Plus, I guess with those 3 things, what else do you need to hear? And so there's a few crops that will survive without any kind of protection at all. And then we will also be handing out in September, hopefully, I think we have everything in stock, right?
Yep.
We ordered it in the spring this year.
Yeah, smart us.
We'll be handing out some row cover. This fabric will help protect the plants. And so barring any really cold temperatures, you can keep a lot of plants alive through the winter and keep vegetables, coming to your plates. Next slide. Okay. So there's some concerns with fall gardening that we're going to address now. So it is the 1st of August, which is a good time to start getting your fall plants in. So timing for the first frost is important. Cooler temperatures affect, what's going to grow, and then decreasing daylight is also our final concern. So at some point in December, daylight drops below 10 hours a day, and that all plant growth stops at that point. So you're hitting that growth time point also. So we'll talk a little more in detail about that. Okay, first frost for us, usually sometime between October 15th and November 15th. Some years it doesn't frost until December, some years it frosts pretty early in October. So it's kind of an unknown. You just want to keep an eye on the forecast once we hit October to try to just kind of keep an eye on that. So we have approximately, hopefully about 80 days until then. So if you have plants, summer crops that have fast maturity dates, like bush beans, cucumbers, summer squash, edamame, things that mature in less that I would shoot for about 70 days at this point if you're looking at something. So things that mature in 70 days or less, you can plant another round of and get more of those crops coming in. And they may keep going, up until they die from frost. So they'll keep producing. Again, just check the seed packets. If you have any questions, you can ask us and we'll look at it. So usually it says, this is a dark star zucchini. It says 50 days to harvest. And then it's probably got a 3 or 4 week harvest window on it. So that's something you can just get more of if you're not yet sick of zucchini. You can plant more. Or bush beans, cucumbers, any of that kind of stuff. Any kind of fast growing summer crops, you can get another round of. You still have time.
We got a freeze dryer.
Oh,
Awesome.
there you go.
Freeze dryer.
That's cool.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
freeze dryer. All right, next slide. Cooler temps. Even though it's gonna hit 90 again, I think on Wednesday, I looked at the forecast. You can get in some cooler season crops now, and they will get into the fall. They love the cooler weather as we get into September, hopefully. Hopefully, we're not seeing 93 days in September. But things like leafy greens, brassicas, peas, alliums, and some root veg are good to plant now also, along with your second or third round of summer crops. Definitely with these cooler season stuff, they need to be kept well watered just to keep them cool. And then, if you have, you can get stuff like shade cloth, maybe a little helpful if it's not looking like it's going to be cooling down anytime soon. And you want to look for varieties that say for fall, winter growing, because these are starting to get into your cold tolerant varieties. So in the spring, for spinach, for example, we pick out varieties that are heat tolerant to some extent. But then in the fall, we're looking for varieties that say cold tolerant so that they can kind of survive this they'll grow in this heat and then they'll survive when it gets cold. The cool thing about a lot of these crops is that if they survive the frost, they do so by producing a lot more sugar in their leaves and parts. And so that sugar is a natural antifreeze. So once it does start freezing, a lot of your crops will get sweeter, like kale and broccoli, collards, carrots. A lot of stuff will get sweeter once it starts freezing, which is kind of cool. And again, some plants are more frost hardy than others. I'm pretty sure collards could survive down to like 0 degrees and be totally fine. Whereas things like cauliflower is a hard one because it doesn't like heat, doesn't necessarily like to freeze. It likes cooler temperatures, but we don't necessarily have a window for that in East Tennessee. So you can kind of check out, this is a really awesome website, Mother of a Hubbard. She unfortunately doesn't update it anymore, but she has some really awesome information archived on it for growing in the winter. And then, so she's got this one in particular says 10 vegetables more cold hardy than kale, which is a fun article about different things that are really good for growing in the winter. Check her out. We'll send out this PowerPoint also, so folks can click on that link. Don't get the sound. So daylight, like I said, once daylight gets below 10 hours, plant growth ceases. So even though something like spinach will survive the freezing, if you plant it too late, it will stop growing. So you need to time it so that it is mature size by December 10th. Because once it's a mature size, it'll just kind of hang out in your garden and you can eat it, but it won't grow anymore until we hit mid-January, in which case it'll start growing. And then once it warms up, it'll start flowering. So even though you could technically plant spinach into November, it just won't be mature enough necessarily by the time December hits. And also as daylight declines, growth will kind of slow down also. So if something says, 50 days to maturity for your spinach, you may need to add a couple of weeks onto that. So as you're thinking about this December 10th date, so you want to back up and make sure that probably your last planting of spinach probably in early October, if you're thinking of that. Late September, early October. So things like lettuce, spinach, they would love to grow in that weather, but again, you're hitting that daylight. So that's what the timing is. And then you'll hit January 15th, sunlight gradually gets above 10 hours a day. Things begin to wake up and they start growing again, but then it starts warming up, and longer daylight also triggers bolting going to flower. So by March, most of these crops are going to be kaput, and you can pull them up and start another round of spring stuff by that point. So again, I mean, this is with a lot of things, if you time the planting right, and it may take you a couple years to really nail it, you can have all this stuff growing year round pretty easily. Okay, so this is last year's PowerPoint because I was on maternity leave and not able to update it. So I think it's the 15th, right, is when they're coming.
Yeah.
So ignore that number. So they're coming on the 15th. So you have to make some decisions in your garden. If your garden is totally full of summer crops and you want to do some for fall, you have to make some decisions about what to pull up, because tomatoes, peppers, winter squash, a lot of these things will survive up until frost, but then they'll die and then you won't have anything in that space. So you have to kind of make a decision about thinking ahead, are there things that I want to pull up now so that I will have things growing in the fall? Obviously, or maybe you're sick of tomatoes at this point, you want to yank them all up, but that's fine. You can leave some tomatoes, you can pull out some of them to kind of make room. So looking at your spring garden map and kind of redoing one for the fall and figuring out where you want things to go. You don't have to rotate crops for the fall if it's in the same year. That gets really complicated if you're trying to rotate crops within the same year. So you could, as long as you didn't have any major disease issues, obviously if something died, if something took out your entire broccoli crop or something in the spring, don't plant broccoli in that space again. But if everything was fine, it's fine, I think, in the same year to just plant broccoli in there and then next year rotate out of that row. So, because it gets complicated. So think about, think about what you would like to be eating in November, in terms of what will sort of be growing in November. I've definitely, with a little row cover, kept peppers alive through to December, but that was just kind of a warm year. So we don't know necessarily if that's going to happen this year. But the row cover will keep things warm for 3 or 4 degrees. So if it freezes normally at 32 degrees, you can keep something alive down to as long as it stays above 29 or 30 with the row cover that would normally otherwise die. So that's something to consider too. All right, next one. Curing storage crops. So right now, probably you're getting some. You pulled up your potatoes, maybe, or they're starting to pull up potatoes. They're probably dying at this point. I get questions about that. My potatoes are dying. Well, it's time to pick them. They let you know when they're ready by dying. The tops do. Sweet potatoes will be dug up in September. A lot of winter squash and stuff. So a lot of these crops can, if you're under proper storage or even improper storage, a lot of them will last for 3 or 4 months. So a lot of them need to be cured as you're coming into September with a lot of these crops maturing. You can think about ways to cure them. This article on Johnny Seeds has a lot of great information about storage crops and optimal conditions for storing them. Johnny's sells to a lot of commercial producers on a large scale who are willing to invest in, the kind of equipment that will create proper storage conditions for hundreds of pounds of sweet potatoes or whatever. You can just do your best at home conditions to kind of just knowing what is ideal and what you can make happen in your own space, basically is what I'm trying to say here. So beets, carrots, celery root, kohlrabi, parsnips, potatoes, rutabaga, sweet potatoes, All of these things have ways that you can pull them out of the garden and keep them edible for, anywhere from a month to 6 months. So that's one way to keep your garden feeding you all year round. Seed saving is also another big question that I get around this time of year. Really, there's so many books and awesome resources out there on this topic, so we don't dive too deeply into it. But there are a couple things to consider. What's the next slide? Sorry. How deeply I need it. Okay, go back. So understanding that you can really only, you can save seeds from anything, but you're only going to get the same variety over and over again if you save from open pollinated varieties. Hybrids are not going to breed true. So if something is hybrid, it's a cross between two different parent stocks. And so its seeds are going to produce whatever, any kind of, it could be similar to the parents, it could be totally weird and different. A lot of times hybrids do not produce tasty or edible offspring. Open pollinated are stable lines. And so as long as you are good with the isolation needs for that variety, for that type of plant, and some things just need to be isolated by 10 feet. Some things need 5 miles of isolation. So you just need, it's something you need to learn. So corn, for example, is very hard to save seed from because the wind is going to carry in, off everything from the neighbors and it's going to cross pollinate. Whereas like beans, for example, as long as there aren't two varieties in the same row, you're probably good on beans. For things that are wind or insect pollinated, you can hand pollinate and bag things. That's kind of an advanced technique. I'll see if I'll talk a little bit more about it. What's the next slide? Easy things to save if you're looking to get into it are beans and peas. 10 or 20 feet isolation, and then you just basically let the pod dry on the plant. So just don't pick it. And then once they're totally dry and crispy, you can take them and shell them. With peas and beans, seeds, you really need to let them, as long as they're dry, totally dry, freeze them because there's a little bean weevil that gets in there. And if you don't freeze them for a week or two, that bean weevil will just like chews through all your seed. It's pretty gross. So freezing them briefly, a week or two will kill the bean weevil, and then you can just keep them dry. Tomatoes are a little more advanced, but those still pretty easy. Again, they don't need a big isolation. So as long as they're like not immediately adjacent to each other, you can save seed from them. You want to harvest them when ripe, and then you scoop out the pulp and you let it ferment in a jar for a couple days, and then kind of wash it and strain it in a strainer. Once it's that, and just spread it out on like a paper towel and let it dry for a few days. And then you can store them in a jar, basically in the freezer, in an airtight container, and they are good to go. And there's loads of information. If you Google this, there's loads of information on seed saving. So that's just kind of a brief thing. So totally, tomatoes, peppers, beans, peas are really easy to save seed from. Squash is really difficult because it's pollinated by insects. So if you've ever had a squash come up in your compost, it's usually some random hybrid that you've never seen before. So that's one of the things you have to isolate. You have to get out there probably in the evening before, bag the flower. And then when it opens in the morning, you have to come out with a paintbrush and get a male flower from the variety that you want, get the pollen, and then you're out there pollinating the plant. I've done it, it's fun. But that's really the only way to guarantee that you're gonna get the same variety from your squash. Otherwise, if you save seed, and people do it every year, they're like, what is this? Like, it's just some random, it's whatever you grew last year plus your neighbors. So so that's kind of something you have to figure out if you're trying to seed save. It's fun. One year I saved bean seeds and I got a random bean that was really cool. It was some random hybrid from something, and I grew it out for a few years, and it was just kind of fun. It's like a fun speckled bean. So you never know.
I'd like to note too that our varieties of tomatoes that we hand out are, I think Black Krim is heirloom, but the others are hybrid. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Thanks. We do tend to hand out hybrids. Probably about half the stuff we hand out is hybrids. Just because there's some disease resistance we're looking for. And to make it easier. So if you have a question about something, just ask us and we'll tell you if it's hybrid or pollinated, basically what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Okay, questions about fall gardening from here or online? Not right now.
Can seeds expire?
Yes. Seeds can expire. Some seeds will last you 5 or 10 years. And some seeds like spinach and anything in the onion family are usually not good even 1 year, after 1 year.
Because I noticed like I had some regular seeds that I planted in, like, some of them none came up, which they are older, that's what I was wondering about. But
Yeah.
I think also I've learned that where my garden is, it's not getting an adequate amount of sunlight. I think next year I need to do backyard.
Okay.
Learning.
Yeah.
But
Seeds, there are ways to store seeds so that they will extend their life a little longer. So in the freezer, we'll extend the
yeah, I've never heard of that. That's actually
Yeah.
kind of neat that you said that.
yeah.
Freezer.
Yeah, the freezer will extend the life of your
Okay.
seeds. So if you have seeds left over from this year and you want to, in packets, not
Yes.
even trying to save them from your garden, if you just want to reuse the packets, you put them in the freezer.
Okay.
And you want them to make sure they stay dry in the freezer. Like you can put them into like a box or something,
Yeah.
so that
Okay.
they're not exposed to like the moisture or anything.
Okay. So I have a problem with my garden. My boyfriend killed half of it. Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, and you can literally see where he sprayed, like, it's just, okay, let's not even get into that, because I worked so hard on it, so let's just say that he ruined it. So the stuff that he put on it, I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna be able to put anything else there this year, probably not next year.
Is it Roundup? Or
I
is it-
think it was Roundup.
Okay, I don't think Roundup has a particularly long
Really?
half-life, so
Yeah.
I would give it, I've given it a couple weeks and then test it. Get a test
Okay, and then
subject.
test something.
Yeah,
Okay, because it literally like, I tried to save what I could, but there was just no saving it.
once it's on, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, and it just went so quick. I literally cried. I cried. Losing half of my garden.
Tremendous.
I would cry too.
But I do have some other like baby plants over here, that, like my watermelon, I don't know. I think I need to fertilize it. But anyway, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That's what I was wondering, if I could plant
yeah, no,
crops there for
the-
fall.
the stuff that's really bad, I think is graze on or graze on or
Okay.
something like, it's for hay fields, basically.
Okay.
I don't know that you can buy it at the market. so.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Um,
That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, yeah, give it a test. I don't think it has too long of
Okay.
a life in the soil, but, is there any questions?
No questions. on
No
that.
questions, great. Are they paying attention?
Yeah.
Just kidding. Okay, soil health. So, we obviously provide tilling in spring. I would love for everyone to get into a situation where, we're converting over to no-till. Tilling does a lot of damage to the soil. So going no-till, A, because we're not always gonna be around to till your garden for you. And B, it creates better soil health, and the better your soil is doing, the better your plants are gonna grow. So fall is a great time to convert to no-till. Adding compost, mulch, and sowing cover crops will get you a long way there. You may be asking, why should I bother? Again, healthy soil grows healthy plants. Healthy soil will give you better yields. It'll have fewer pest and disease problems. It does take time. It's not going to be an instantaneous thing. Especially here in East Tennessee, we have these really hard clay soils. I know we have some human transplants to our region every year that join the program who are in for a shock when they stick a shovel in the ground. But you can get there, and I think it's easier to build up soil health with clay soils. Clay soils are inherently more able to hold on to nutrients and to water. And so you can fix it if you're willing to work at it. But it will take some time and effort. Next slide. So soil food web, just kind of a fun little slide. Just there's a lot of life in the soil that you can't see, and the healthier your soil is, the more life there is. And so, you know, and what is driving and fueling this whole web of life here is organic matter in your soil. So the more organic matter you have, the more life you're able to support in your soil. And so it gets gradually bigger and bigger. Next slide. So tilling causes a lot of problems. It causes soil degradation. It can lead to nutrient runoff. So you're spending all this money on fertilizer. And when it rains, if you don't have a lot of organic matter in your soil binding up those nutrients, it just gets washed out when it rains. Erosion, nitrogen disappears from your soil faster. Tilling causes hard pan, so it does bust up the soil, but immediately under where those metal tines are, there's a layer of, especially in our clay soils, hard pan, which becomes, if you do it year after year, it becomes impenetrable to water, and can cause a lot of problems with drainage in your soil. So, and it doesn't matter how deep you go. I mean, if you have a 3-inch tiller blade or a 12-inch tiller blade, you're going to create hard pan immediately underneath that blade. Tilling increases weeds because it's drawing up all of those seeds to the surface where they get sunlight. And like, unlike, you know, we were discussing the shelf life of some seeds,
Yeah.
you know, maybe 5 years on a lot of stuff, but some of these weeds will germinate after 100 years if the conditions are right. So not great. Again, especially in clay soil, it leads to a lot of compaction, and it can increase soil pathogens because it's decreasing the good stuff, the bad stuff is able to survive a little better. So next slide.
I'm gonna check questions.
Oh. I'd say an inch of compost is a good way to start in the fall and spring. So you can multiply that. So if you have a 25 by 25 garden, or better yet, if you exclude your pathways, you're not spending money on your pathways. So calculate your soils, the amount of space you have, but just say 25 by 25 is 500 square feet. I'm gonna try to do math in front of y'all and make it embarrassing. If you've got an inch, so that's 500 cubic, no, I'm not even gonna attempt it. So you just take a cubic inch of soil and you have to do some math and figure out how many cubic inches and convert that into cubic yards. Email me when I have a calculator in front of me and I'll figure it out for you. And so probably you need maybe a yard, half a yard to a yard of compost on an average size garden is good to spread out. Mulch, if you're going with mulch, now is a great time to start spreading any leaves when they start falling down. If you've got a bag on your mower that can collect stuff, it's really awesome to collect shredded leaves and grass and start dumping that on your garden in the fall, assuming you don't spray anything.
And yes to adding it on top.
And yes to adding it on top. So don't, if you're going with no till, then you don't have to till it in. Basically, you can just spread it on top, and especially in the fall. So if you put down a layer, an inch of compost on your garden, and then put down a layer of mulch over that and just let it sit, that's awesome too. And that'll decompose. The soil life will come up and bring that down. The worms and everything will bring that down and incorporate it into the soil.
You said grass. If you mow your grass and when it's this high, you send that in your garden?
Yeah. Once it's mulched up, as long as it doesn't have seed heads or anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't put the seed heads on your garden bed. But if you kept it short and it's not seeding, going to seed, especially when the leaves start falling down, that makes sure leaves and grass clippings is great.
So if you let it dry a little bit before you put it on green.
You can put it on green because that green is nitrogen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And as it's drying out, that nitrogen is going out. I mean, either way, mulch is fine, but with your grass clippings, when they're fresh, that's a little more nitrogen you're adding in. Okay. Yeah, she's saying she had a lot of weeds. And Johnson grass is a particular pain in the rear. But tilling's not gonna help Johnson grass though, because it's those rhizomes. If you break it up with tilling, you're gonna have a lot more Johnson grass. So definitely if you're having a huge issue with Johnson grass or Bermuda, just tarping it. And tarping it now and maybe in 6 months, it might be better. Sometimes with really pernicious weeds, you need a full year of tarping to get rid of it.
What do you recommend doing like with the borders? Like if you tarp your garden space and then like all around the borders is grass.
Yeah, so I am dealing with the very same issue and I'm going to just put a row, I'm gonna get another row of landscape fabric and I'm gonna square off 4 feet around the whole edge of the garden. And you can actually, if you tuck under the edge of the landscape fabric and then put it down, it's a little more resistant to the mower hitting it. Because you will hit it, you do have to get that edge. But yeah, just creating, because the side of the garden that does have that extra edge is awesome. And the sides that don't have that edge around it, the weeds do, they, even with the landscape fabric, do creep in. You can lay the compost down underneath the cardboard and then put the mulch on top. So compost, cardboard, mulch, probably if you're gonna do it that method. And let that rot down. I would still recommend using landscape fabric in the spring with that because especially with Bermuda grass, it kind of just goes right in there and it's very happy to grow. But that's a good way to start a no-till garden. And I think we may talk about that in just a second if I remember. All right, let's keep it. I like to get wordy. Yeah, you know, if you don't want to completely commit to no-till, go in low-till, so where you're just tilling once a year. Understanding that again, conventional no-till does rely on Roundup to get things going. So if you're committed to organic, you know, we're relying on tarps. So Roundup kills them pretty instantly. Tarps take, you know, you're looking at 3 to 6 months of tarping to really kill stuff. So getting that stuff together now and tarping now is great. So you'll be ready in the spring. And then again, Roundup also damages, I don't think I mentioned it when I showed you the slide, but a lot of people refer to all that life in your soil as the underground herd, because every acre of well-managed land contains, I think, about 2 cows worth of life, if you were to weigh it all. I don't know who actually figured that out, but that's kind of in the soil health world, they talk about managing your underground herd. So you're managing that life in your soil just as you would manage, you know, a cow or whatever is on your land. So glyphosate, Roundup will kill these guys too. Although they do in an otherwise healthy situation, they'll rebound. But every year when they spray that glyphosate, you're seeing a dip in the soil health. So if you're going no-till, you're using the tarps, you're not spraying, you know, that underground herd is only going to grow in its health and bounty. So that's just something to consider. I will personally say I am not above spraying Johnson grass and Bermuda grass in small, you know, if it's becoming out of control. Because stuff is almost impossible to dig out. I've actually tried digging out Johnson grass before and the hole got to be this big and it was still running through. So, you know, if that's the only space you have for garden and it's overrun, you know, use it once and then try not to do it again. But, so soil health principles, keep soil covered, disturb it as little as possible, keep plants growing year round, diversify plant species, incorporate animals and manure. Were there any other questions before we dig? We're gonna deep dive into the soil health a little more. Remove the tape from the cardboard, yeah. Okay. Cereal boxes, it's fun. Okay. All right, so we're gonna deep dive into this. So, you know, this is what your conventional field might look like. And Ray Archuleta is a really big guy in the soil health rotational grazing field. And he says the soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. So keeping stuff mulched, using cover crops, reducing and planting direct, so not clearing out the cover crops once you've killed it, and planting directly into that material. So basically, you're planting a cover crop over the winter when you're not necessarily growing anything in that piece of in that area. You're killing the cover crop in the spring. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then you're planting directly into that crop residue. And so you basically, instead of having to carry in mulch, you are growing the mulch and then planting into it. So, and the soil has the benefit of those live roots as we're going in through the winter. So keeping the soil covered, again, reduces weeds, retains moisture, keeps soil cool, feeds the underground matter. Reducing soil disturbances. So basically your soil disturbance is tilling for the most part. It's also if you're walking on your beds, if you remember back in the spring, I said, create walking areas and planting areas and don't step in your planting areas, because that even just your body walking over those planting areas on a regular basis is going to cause compaction, and that's going to be considered a soil disturbance. So next slide. Keep plants growing year round. So this is actually a root tip. And there's a lot going on. The roots are quite permeable. And so the soil life and the roots are actually in a lot of communication with each other. So the roots are exuding sugars into the soil, and that is feeding the microbial life. And in return, so the plants actually aren't able to just directly absorb nutrients like minerals from the soil. So the microbial life is actually what's dissolving and kind of processing the nutrients in the soil, and they're feeding it back to the plant in exchange basically for the sugars that the plants are. So it's this kind of symbiotic relationship between the plants and the microbial life. It's pretty fascinating if you ever want to dig into it. So this only happens when there's living roots in the soil. So anytime you've just got bare soil going on, this relationship isn't there. And this microbial life will die off because it doesn't have the food from the plants. So again, so no live roots means starvation for soil life. So when you go back in the spring and if you've left it bare all winter, you go back in the spring and you plant your plants, they're not going to have the benefit of all those extra little critters in there to help them grow and provide nutrients and help them fend off diseases. So anytime you don't have something growing, you know, putting in a cover crop is really ideal. And there's summer cover crops and winter cover crops. I think I discussed that on a future slide.
I think you do.
Yeah, so we'll talk about what's appropriate cover crops for different times of the year. But growing a diversity of plants is also really good. So again, I think I talked in the spring about, you know, you may have a spot where your tomatoes grew really well, and so you think to yourself, I'm just going to keep planting tomatoes in that spot. You know, in following years, just because they grew really well that first year, but gradually, and they may grow well the second year too, but when you get in the third, fourth, fifth year, disease is going to start building up in that soil, in that particular spot. So rotation is important, but also if you are able, putting in a diversity of different plants. Again, getting back to that feeding thing on the previous slide, different plants are going to exude different types of sugar and different amounts of food. So the more diversity of the plant life that you're putting in, the more diversity that's going to create in the soil life below. And again, more diversity, the more diversity in the system, the healthier it is, and the more resilient it is, and the more able to withstand any kind of issues that may come at you. You know, these heavy rains or drought or whatever, you're gonna have a more resilient soil population. So putting in diverse plants, using crop rotations, companion planting. So even just kind of, you don't have to go like what's in this slide where they've just totally mishmashed things together. But even just putting, say your herbs next to your tomato, you know, planting your basil with your tomatoes and stuff like that, can go into that. And then using, even if you've got pretty straight, if you don't mix anything during the year, so you've got a row for your tomatoes, you've got a row for your squash, you know, you're not mixing stuff. Using a cover crop mix with 2 to 10 species is one way to put in a lot of diversity, say in the winter. I think our mix usually has 4 or 5 different things.
Yeah, we hand out a mixture of rye, winter pea, crimson clover, and daikon radish,
Yeah. Sometimes we throw wheat in there.
or sometimes wheat. Yeah.
So those are 4 to 5 things, you know, that you'll get in the cover crop mix. So that can help with the diversity of plants. So next one. Incorporate animals and manure. This is the 5th principle of soil health. You know, this could mean bringing in manure. Again, test it first because there are these issues with persistent herbicides these days. You don't want to spread manure out and then find out that it's going to kill everything. So test it on a sacrificial crop, plant before you spread it out. Bringing in manure is one way to do that. If you have chickens or ducks on a small scale, then, you know, at the end of the year, they can kind of run through and clean up things and poop, and kind of get that into your garden. On a large scale, you know, rotating, if you've got cattle or, you know, goats or whatever, rotating where your garden plot is or rotating them through can help crop areas like that. So this one's not necessarily easy to incorporate on a small scale, especially if you aren't able to keep poultry or whatever, but it's something to aspire to. Next one. Cover crops, we're gonna delve a little more deeply. Again, especially in the winter, not leaving your soil bare, because if you just leave it bare over the winter, if we get a big rain event, it's just gonna wash away. So it helps prevent erosion. It does increase organic matter, because you're planting all this stuff in there and then you're killing it in place in the spring. And so all of that plant material is gonna rot down and create organic matter in your soil. Again, it increases diversity, and it can stabilize and increase nutrients in the soil, especially nitrogen. And nitrogen off gases pretty quickly. So I think we've got clover and winter pea in the mix. So those 2 things are both going to fix nitrogen into the soil. But then also we've got the grass, the winter rye, and that actually will lock up extra nitrogen in the soil so it doesn't off gas, and it actually will keep it in the roots of the plant. And so when it dies, the nitrogen will go back into the soil too. So and other nutrients too. They just prevent them from running off in the winter, lock them up in the plant. It dies, it gets incorporated back into the soil. So, and it suppresses weeds. Not only does it suppress weeds by just, you know, taking up all of the sunlight, so there's no room in here for weeds, but rye also produces a chemical, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but allelopathic chemical. It's the same kind of thing. The reason why stuff doesn't grow well under walnuts, because the walnut is actually producing a chemical that suppresses plant growth. And rye will do that too. So it will actually prevent weeds from germinating. So it doesn't affect already grown plants. So you can put your tomatoes into the residue of the rye, and the already grown plants will be fine, but it will suppress weeds from sprouting in the soil. It's not a huge effect, but it is something that you can incorporate. We do hand out cover crop seeds. Anyone else? Yeah. With the Bermuda grass, I would go with a tarp over cover cropping. until you can kind of suppress it enough that you can do. There, not to get too far into the weeds, but there have been some interesting studies using cover crops to kill Bermuda grass that you maybe want to look up if you're feeling really frisky. But it gets kind of technical, and I would stick to tarping, just blocking out sunlight, trying to kill that stuff first.
And then,
You want to remove the cloth and get a cover crop in, and then in this, I'll talk about it in another slide, how you kill cover crop in the spring, and then put the cloth back on. And actually, it's fun if you just kind of label your cloth. So if you had tomatoes in that row, you know, just label it tomato, and then you could just, with your crop rotation plan, just move the cloth down to the next row that you want tomatoes in. That way you are just kind of keeping track of stuff. So you don't have to put new cloth down and burn new holes. Because that stuff, if you take care of it, it'll last, you know, at least 2-3 years, if not longer. So especially if you bring it up in the winter and dry it out and put it in your garage.
I watched your video on did burn.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Easy.
Good. You got to be real fast on that, otherwise you're sicker. Yeah. But yeah, types of cover crops. So when I talk about mixtures of cover crops, grasses, legumes, brassicas, and then non-legume broadleaves. I guess that's a kind of a catch-all category. So what's the next slide? Grasses. I like to talk, don't I?
yeah.
Go back. All right, so like I said, winter rye is a really great one for the winter. Spring oats, they label these things, and you buy them with these names. Spring oats are good for the spring. Sorghum and Sudan grass are great for summer. However, they grow really big and can be kind of hard to manage on a small scale. So just be aware of that. Legumes, clover. I like crimson clover because it seems to kill pretty easily. White, I think, can be a little harder to kill. I should scrub hairy vetch from. I'm going to mention hairy vetch. Don't plant hairy vetch. It can become a pretty invasive weed if it goes to seed. So it's often if you buy a cover crop mix, you know, a lot of times they will include hairy vetch, but I would avoid it. Austrian winter pea is one of my favorites. In the summer, soybeans, field peas, cowpeas are great in a mix. Daikon radish is really cool because it's also called tillage radish, and if you've ever seen a daikon radish in the store, they get 2 feet, 1 to 2 feet long. And so what that's actually doing is just punching a hole down into the ground. So if you have hard pan, if you have compacted soil, having a mix with a lot of daikon radish in it is really great because it'll punch through whatever. And then it's not very cold hardy. So once it gets below, I can't remember what the cutoff, once it freezes to a certain point, it actually will die. And it'll start creating this that tube will just start rotting basically. And it'll just be a nice tube of organic matter that's going straight down. So they can really help with drainage if you're having a lot of issues with drainage. They're pretty cool. I will say that, it's in the mustard family basically. So it can get a little stinky. We've got a lot of them out there, and a frost just killed them and they're starting to rot. So it can get a little stinky, but I will say the benefits, especially for a year, if you do that for a year or two, if you have a lot of compaction in your soil, it can really help a lot. Mustard, rapeseed, aka canola, collards and turnips can all be used as cover crops in the Nebraska section. Non-legume broadleaves. Buckwheat is one of my particular favorites, especially in the summer. Buckwheat grows really fast. So if you have a window of like 4 to 6 weeks where you've taken out a spring crop, you don't necessarily want to put a summer crop in, you want to save that space for a fall crop, you can put in buckwheat. It grows really fast, it flowers, the bees love it. And buckwheat, from what I've been told by soil health experts, actually has a really nice, the roots will soften clay soil and make it more friable. So it's kind of a personal favorite. Other things in this category, flax, sunflowers, marigolds, other edible crops. So a lot of things can be cover crops, if you're willing to just throw some seed down. I think sunflowers are kind of fun too. Like a summer mix could be buckwheat, sunflowers, maybe some like radishes, cowpeas would be a fun kind of summer crop mix. And you could probably also eat some of it and enjoy the flowers and the beans that comes with it.
On the grasses, if you have a small area, because I know you said that one like runs away. what would-
Hairy vetch will run away.
That one, okay.
And Sudan grass, sorghum and Sudan grass are very tolerant.
Okay, yeah.
And they're used on commercial, no-till operations.
Oh, okay, so,
I wouldn't necessarily.
and that would run away from you, right?
It won't run away, it just gets very
It
big.
could.
It's just-
Oh,
It's
it's
just
big.
big, it's
Oh,
hard,
okay.
it's hard to kill
Okay,
and get it back into your soil, so. I wouldn't necessarily fool with it, I'm just mentioning it because you'll see it in cover crop mixes.
okay.
Alright. If you really want to read this, you can later. Let's keep going. Yeah. Legumes, they fix nitrogen. That's kind of the important part. With that, again, that see, this is an image of the daikon radish. It's probably going down about 3 feet. Gone. Non-legume, ragweed, buckwheat. All right. Okay, terminating cover crops. So you can kind of see them growing here and then tarped basically. So you will need kind of thick black plastic to kill a cover crop. And you want to plan ahead. You need to plan ahead of time when you're using cover crops because you need at least 3 weeks to terminate them with a tarp. Some people say that not to bow them and you need to like squash them down, but really honestly, just run a mower over them. And then smother for 3 weeks is really what you're gonna get. And when I was talking about the rye, that seed germination effect that will kind of pass after 3 weeks, so you could plant directly into that soil after 3 weeks with the rye. But it will keep the weeds, kind of suppress the weeds. So that's basically how you terminate it. Just you need to plan 3 weeks ahead, mow it, tarp it, and then sit 3 weeks, pull it off, and you should be good to plant directly into the residue with transplants. If you're planting seeds, you'll probably need to get in there with a hoe and kind of pull out the residue and make a cleaner seed bed for it.
I have a
Big seeds, like-
question. What is the latest you can plant cover crops?
So rye can be planted into December. Rye will grow. Ideally, to get the maximum benefit, you want to plant cover crop in September, early September. Not every anything before December, you're going to get some benefit. You're going to get the maximum benefit if you plan ahead and plant in September. You may not necessarily have, if you're just like totally done with gardening, pull everything up in September, plant your cover crop, ignore it until spring. If you are wanting to do fall gardening, you're just gonna have to plan, I would do probably at least a third of your garden if you can in cover crops. And if you're really interested, if you're all gung ho about growing growing through the winter, I would dedicate at least a third of your garden to cover crops every year and rotate it each year.
But would the mustard and the collard greens and things count as a cover crop if you plant?
Not if you're planning to eat them.
Okay, but I mean,
Yeah. I think the benefit of having them as part of a mix, and
Okay.
usually it's maybe 5% of the mix is some kind of brassica.
So give part of it. And
Yeah.
grow it
So if you want to eat them, I would bet it's,
as
and
you
then
do.
add that and then do the cover crop in another section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
Planting any cover crops. So with big seeds, with transplants, you can transplant directly in. Big seeds like squash, beans, and corn, you can plant directly into it without worrying too much about it. Just come through. For small seeds, like I said, you need to pull up the residue and make especially if you said you had a little mantis tiller. You can, if you need it, you can kind of till just an inch or two to make a nice seed bed for smaller seeds.